So what we're going to be talking about are some things, and Brendan's done a great job of looking globally at some of these issues. And they actually have programs called Water Sponge and Carbon Sink. And so we got all these programs across the world. And one of them does water, one of them does climate. But there are really no programs that we can find that puts them all together in this nice little format, and we're hoping that San Antonio can be a leader on this. So what we're going to be looking at the background, the current knowledge, what are the economic justifications, the potential here in San Antonio, some possible incentive programs, and then the conclusions and how we use this information. So in the background, you may be familiar that I spoke some time ago about stormwater management recommendations. And from that, we have those provisions and kind of going forward with those ideas. And part of those ideas are included in these recommendations that we'll be looking at tonight. And then came along the climate action process. And that's where we had the ability to actually select mitigation strategies. People nominated strategies, they put them on the board, and by golly, the one that got the most points was the one to maximize carbon sequestration of public green spaces. And I get goosebumps when I talk about it. So we are looking at what are some of the mechanisms to implement these policies, ordinances, incentives, and lots of public education. So these same practices that we promoted in stormwater management are the exact same practices that will help to increase carbon sequestration in San Antonio. So where's our current knowledge? Looking at the research, a lot of it is just emerging. I mean, this stuff is coming hot off the press, 2018, 2019, and it's difficult to put it all together, but we've done our best about trying to give you apples and apples. There may be some apples and oranges, okay? But they're all in the fruit family. So therefore, the data that we've collected, it's globally, it's local, it's national, and it used to all be just agriculture, because they've been working on this, and of course, we'll talk more about that later, but anyway, the research has been based in agriculture and looking at changing agriculture practices to sequester more carbon. But now we've got other ecosystems popping out with the data: turf, prairie, forest, wetlands, riparian, and floodplains. And from this research, we feel like we can give you some recommendations on increasing water storage and carbon sequestration, and to kind of understand what type of systems may be more beneficial than others, or where you can maximize more. So looking at this is a little table, and this is pretty much apples and apples. There's a couple of oranges in here, and one of the things is that the data coming that's specific on carbon sequestration does a lot of modeling, and they're using the net carbon sequestration, the million grams of carbon sequestered per hectare per year. And that's great, because that's easy to compare. The ranges are amazing, but a lot of the information is down there in just what is the gross. What is a system able to sequester? So we like the net. It gives you a good feel for it. But as you can see, looking in here, we're pretty similar to, it actually translates to 0.5 ton per acre per year. Mm-hmm. We don't really have to worry about saturation in San Antonio because we've got these great hot summers. Up north they have to worry about that, but for us we can just keep doing it over and over again every year. But look at floodplains and riparian areas. They are, from all the data, they have the greatest potential for sequestering the most carbon dioxide, and we already know that they are the best systems for giving our flooding resiliency, cleaning stormwater before it hits our creeks, and storing that water and slowly letting it travel underground and helping streams and creeks to maintain flows, which is one of our biggest problems in San Antonio, is low flow, and creates a lack of oxygen in the water. So how do we use this information? These are real life photographs, right, from some of our public green spaces. And this is what we want to work, and it's wonderful because we are working, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. And now, just like a school teacher, I never really was a school teacher, but I always kind of wanted to be, so I'm going to pass you around samples. These are soil samples that are labeled. Okay. And you can kind of see the difference in where we're going. What's our target? I like visual. What's our target? What are we trying to do? So here are some soils that we have the potential to actually increase their carbon sequestration and water sponge capabilities. So using this information, modifying management practices for soils and vegetation. This is a low-hanging fruit, right? It doesn't really cost us anything, and it'll probably save us money. So modifying, our goals are to increase infiltration into the soil, increase the water storage so it stays in the soil, and then this will reduce stormwater runoff, peak flows, improve water quality, reduce the need for irrigation, and reduce summertime temperatures. Build healthier soils, encourage more vibrant landscapes, and create resilience. And sequester more carbon, because we want to put those two together. The barriers are pretty much, this is going to be the big one. And I imagine that we're going to have to do a lot of public education to help people change their perceptions about what is the type of landscaping that's acceptable, because it's pretty much, we're not going to be recommending that it's mowed less than 3 inches. But we'll talk about that. So in order to do this, one of the first things we want to do is have undisturbed soils with a continuous living perennial cover. This is the best strategy in all the research. This is what gets us more infiltration, no matter what the soil texture, if it's sand, silt, or clay, like in San Antonio. It's really keeping it covered. You don't want to ever see any bare ground in a landscape if you can keep from it. Now, we know we have some wildflowers that want that bare ground, and we'll have to work with that, but traditionally in our yards we don't want that. Mowing practices that allow grass to grow higher this will increase the infiltration, and it's a possibility to increase it so that a 1 inch per hour rain event will be totally absorbed. This practice will reduce, again, soil water evaporation, high soil temperatures, which increases the release of CO2. And that's what's going on, is that when those little microbes are in the soil and the temperature's going up, their respiration goes up, and in the summertime they are breathing so hard and breaking down and releasing a lot of CO2. So by keeping it covered, Lisa, tell them how much was that difference in, I'll let them know. So she has this thermometer. She's out at Woodlawn Lake Park, and she's in the Esplanade and has her thermometer in the Esplanade. It's 114 degrees.
The soil?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. She couldn't get it much deeper than that to test it, but in the shade or in the mulch area around the actual building, it was only 91 degrees. This is huge when we're talking about these living systems. So soil erosion is the number one pollutant in the U.S., and we have a huge issue with that. And God bless TCI's heart. For every nickel, I wish they had a nickel for every cubic yard of sediment they had to take out of the drainage system. So adding compost, all the research saying adding some type of compost, and this does not have to be necessarily a manure-based or biosolids-based compost, but adding the organic matter will increase the soil organic matter. I'm hoping that everybody will walk away from this and go, do you know what SOM is? It's soil organic matter. So we're going to be looking at increasing soil organic matter and looking at the co-benefits that can be achieved. So using this information, Modifying vegetation and soil practices is the low-hanging fruit. And the tough one's going to be shifting our paradigm, because many directors before the one that we have now and our stormwater manager, this is what they developed for our stormwater management, is the gray infrastructure. So we have a lot of water coming down really fast. It's concentrated, it's polluted, and what we'd like to look at, and we've got a lot of efforts going between the San Antonio River Authority, some of TCI's projects. There's a lot of movement, and that's part of what I'm hoping this group will help create the political will to keep that movement going, where we're using more green infrastructure, where we're looking at a more of a decentralized, and this is going to take a lot of retrofitting, but there's so much that we can do in our individual yards to be able to move us towards some of these efforts. So looking at a watershed approach and having appropriate size or scaled green infrastructure within a community can not only assist with flooding issues and help to minimize needing additional huge gray infrastructure, it'll help preserve what we have, but it'll cool communities, store more water, allowing water to go slowly into those creeks so we have flows for longer period of time, and increasing soil carbon. So other factors to consider. It's, we look at the vegetation, we looked at the different types of vegetation systems that work well. I'll give you more information. The other thing we have to consider is just the biophysical factors such as reflectivity, evaporation and surface roughness, and that these can sometimes alter temperatures more than carbon sequestration does, or lack of carbon sequestration. And with that, we're going to go into a little bit of information about heat island and economics.
So the urban heat island effect is described and defined as an urban area that has a higher temperature than the surrounding areas due to urban human activity. Currently in San Antonio, we're experiencing our own urban heat island effect, and as you can see from a study conducted from 1997 until 2010, that our urban heat island is increasing at a rate of 0.8 Celsius per decade. This effect is exacerbated by the use of impermeable materials such as concrete, cement, and asphalt. And this, you can see the relationship between this exacerbation between the heat island effect and these materials, as a study has shown during a summer day of a peak average temperature of 90 degrees Fahrenheit, found that asphalt had an average temperature of 195 degrees Fahrenheit, and cement had an average degree of 155 degrees Fahrenheit. There's a very high heat reflection and heat retention rate that really heats around surrounding air and increases and exacerbates the urban heat island effect. This also gives us more insight as to the use of these materials during gray infrastructure projects and the concerns that arise with them. So not only do impermeable materials exacerbate the urban heat island effect, however, they also have a very large carbon footprint themselves. It is found by a survey done by the Portland Cement Association, found that roughly 1 ton of carbon is emitted during the manufacturing process of roughly 1 ton of cement. In addition, in 2005, a survey found that in the US alone, we manufactured around 105.7 million tons of cement. With the societal cost of the equation, with 1 ton of carbon equating to $40 US, we have a nationally carbon emission value of $4 billion alone within concrete. Although impermeable surfaces may be necessary in urban areas, such as for streets, from this side, it should be understandable that these impermeable materials may be more damaging than we thought. As shown through an economic justification between green infrastructure and gray infrastructure, we found in Lake Como, Minnesota, that they reduced city spending by $500,000 with a storm sewer system that accumulated and compounded ecosystem benefits and economic benefits over time. Secondly, another cost comparison here. We have a 25-year plan implemented in Lancaster, Pennsylvania to reduce energy spendings, to raise water quality and air quality. And you can see here that they saved around $120 million by utilizing green infrastructure over gray infrastructure. Additionally, after this 25-year plan, it would require $5 million in annual ecosystem benefits due to the growth of the green infrastructure itself. You can see the cost comparison here, and this is just the cost avoided that would have been spent on green infrastructure compared to the actual spending for the sewer system. So shifting to a more global perspective, I have a few case studies analyzing green infrastructure and sponge city programs in China. Firstly, we have a case study of green infrastructure in China in 2010, where 35 major cities had implemented green infrastructure practices of greenways, park gardens, green roofs, woodlands, and community farms and urban forests. They found that within these 35 major cities, they were able to sequester 18.7 million tons of carbon, which equates to $74 million in US currency. In addition, in 2015, China initiated the Sponge City program utilizing similar green infrastructure practices, utilizing bioretention measures, green roofs, pervious pavements, grass swales, and storm retention ponds. The SPC program in China was initiated in 2015 by the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Water Resource in order to combat increasing water and air pollutant levels. As you can see, after 1 year of the survey, after the implementation of the Sponge City project, the program implemented found that they had reduced 70%, or the goal of the SPC program was to retain 70% of all incoming stormwater for further use and to be utilized. You see here the green infrastructure and low impact development practices used in the Sponge City case reduced stormwater by 31% and reduced flow by 53%. These numbers are amateur due to the fact that green infrastructure takes a little more time to develop, and that these numbers are expected to increase over time. Moving to a more local perspective, we have an ecosystem analysis done in 2007 of San Antonio. We find that San Antonio has a tree canopy area of 113,000 acres. Within this tree canopy, we have 974 million cubic feet of stormwater, which is absorbed, and then with an economic value of $624 million. This tree canopy stores 4.9 million tons of carbon and sequesters 38,000 tons annually, giving it an economic benefit of $1.5 million.
Thank you. So my name is Lisa Martinez. I am a Texas Master Naturalist, and I represented the Master Naturalist on the Climate Action Working Group. So some of what I'm going to tell you is from the climate plan, and some of what I'm going to tell you is mine. Please don't, nothing is officially Master Naturalist, just understand. Especially if it sounds political, it didn't come out of my official mouth. Well, while this is still up there, I want you to notice the huge difference between these numbers. So all of these numbers have been in our possession for over 10 years. And so one of the things that I want you to leave this room with is that yes, these numbers need to be updated. In fact, the update simply has not been released. This time around, the U.S. Forest Service did a huge analysis for us. So I'm going to sort of do the color commentary for this group. What I want to draw your attention to is various specific examples, some of which are already in process elsewhere, some of which we could implement here. There's a lot of golfers in San Antonio. I tried without success to find out what the acreage was for golf courses in San Antonio. I could find it in terms of yardage between the tee and the green. That just didn't do it. But here's an example that was brought to the Climate Action Plan by the people from Mitchell Lake, who are Audubon Society people. This is the Trinity Forests golf course, which is a new course that is being designed in Dallas-Fort Worth, and it is being designed on land that was partly landfill. So what they have done is cooperate, and they are going to actually be able, so the green parts are what they call in-play areas, and then everything else, including some areas that they sort of borrowed from outside the boundaries for drainage, means that of the 154 acres that happy golfers can use, then 71 acres can be set aside for various forms of short grass and middle grass and trees for restoration, for habitat. Audubon being who they are, they're thinking birds, but of course you can't just do birds, everything else shows up too. And this is not just a sketch, though I'm using the concept plan. The report has prices for specific seeds from specific vendors amounts. It's a full-blown presentation. I've not been there, but I'm interested. Next, madam. Okay, so San Antonio, don't tell anybody that San Antonio is a progressive community, but we have this very strong need to protect our own function and as a thriving city. And so we have an Edwards Aquifer Protection Program voted in with the approval of the voters. And we started out in 2000 purchasing land. That turned out to be, I gather, a sort of a limiting situation. And then after that, there was a transition so that now properties essentially agree a conservation easement. And I'm not an expert on conservation easements, but basically you can get agreements from property owners without their having to sell you the property. So we have what I consider is some substantial success, 156,000 acres of private property, except for the first batch, which is now city property. So if we wanted to do some soil restoration, if we wanted to do some work to restore these things, right now there is no affirmative program in place to improve the soil and the water retention capabilities of those properties. But we have learned there's all kinds of ways that people are doing that with property owners around Texas, different producers.
In other states too.
And in other states, and it's definitely a federal program. And that's actually, as the lady from Senator Menendez's office here, that's something we need to catch up with. There's several other states that have programs to do this. Next, madam. Okay, so then the basic message here is that San Antonio is a big place. And we have a lot of very dedicated people. And we are a place that is a destination. So, but we also have facilities that we have for our own use. But we've done smart things. And so I'm just, like I said, I'm the color commentary. I'm just offering examples. We have 240 parks, more than 15,000 acres. We have the Howard Peak Greenway trails, which were, remember, originally started to take care of an area where houses had been flooded, and to buy that out and create an area where we could do an amenity out of a liability. Hemisphere is one of those areas that it looks like this format of Hemisphere is going to work. There's our serving platter right downtown in the middle of our urban heat island that we invite our tourists to. Let's do everything we can to cool that area using natural processes. Then there's the San Antonio Riverwalk and the River Improvement Project, which only took 30 years. I mean, come on, people, you just get started, you keep working at it. And then Debbie's and our hearts sing when we have the idea of restoring riparian areas, and there are mechanisms and financing mechanisms available to start doing that. And we actually have, I think it was actually Neffy who told me years ago, 1,300 miles of creeks in Bexar County. And then, of course, we have the other kind of park, which is the kind of park which was, they tend to be on the north side of town where the elevation is higher, the terrain is more inclined, but there's a couple of them that are on the south side or at least on more level land. And then CPS Energy, I put this here, even though I didn't have any specific acreages, because they're a big participant in the climate action plan, and they're a big participant frequently in the conflicts that emerge out of the climate action discussions with regards to their emissions. But they're also a very large property owner, and they operate all kinds of facilities, all kinds of rights of way, all kinds of lakes and natural things that we could, in fact, tap into their natural resource capability. So when I say private lands, here's what I'm saying. We have a lot of institutions in San Antonio that are cultural, but they own property. They have a sense of place. They have a place. If you ask them if they're going to move out anytime soon, the answer is of course not. But yet, affirmatively explaining to these people how they can be land stewards of those locations is something we can do. Every church, every cemetery, my family is buried in this one. My family's buried in this cemetery. And that's only one of several cemeteries. So those numbers are merely indicators of the kinds of property that nonprofits, schools, other organizations have. And then we have our affluent corporate partners. And my definition of climate equity means everybody can contribute. It isn't. I mean it seriously. Everyone who has the wealth to be able to have a 200-acre corporate campus, especially a worn-out hill country campus, there's got to be something we can do out there. And then the school districts. We all help pay. We all pay for those schools as they get worn out and people stop taking care of the grounds or scalp them. I know personally, I work in a program that has permission to develop outdoor education programs for all 80 of the elementary schools in Northside ISD. That's a lot of turf or a lot of bare compacted ground.
Yeah.
So
Headwaters should be up there too.
well, yes, Headwaters. Actually, Headwaters is so far ahead of everybody else, literally. But yes, definitely. And Headwaters, I'll bring up on the incentives. Okay, so so just sort of
So give us the bottom line. What is that number?
the bottom line is, without even adding the ones I'm guessing at, and we're doing this in hectares today, all you metric savvy people, 73,373 hectares. So at a ton per
And multiply
hectare.
that times 2, más o menos.
Oh, you want it in acres? I had it in acres. It's 181,000 acres. Okay, so
Okay.
which is the number we want for carbon?
That's good.
Yeah. So that's how many tons of carbon we could do. pretty much
73,000 hectares
Yeah.
and double that, 150,000.
just through management changes. We're not talking about property transfers. We're not talking about construction. We're talking about teaching people how to do this and having them commit to do it and do it.
So we're going to kind of sum it up and give you the recipe, right? So ecosystems that provide the greatest benefit with the least amount of carbon footprint is looking at a complex vegetative cover such as trees with understory or plants growing underneath. And lo and behold, that's exactly what gives us the best water quality. When you have stormwater running off of those areas, that works better than a grass filter strip or a treed area. But interesting enough, putting a grass filter strip above a treed area gets you even better water quality. That grass filter strip turns out to be really good at removing sediment. So we can reduce stormwater runoff, we can reduce temperatures and the albedo because it's actually treed areas, complex treed areas that give us a lower albedo, and then we have the ability to do a lot of modifications with prairie grasses. I was never really a prairie grass person, okay? I was a tree person. But I'm seeing the light. There's some real benefits. Look at those root structures right there. There's turf grass. So the shorter you cut it, the fewer roots you have, the less carbon you have in the soil. They just go hand in hand. Look at that root structure. That's one of our best grasses to put along riparian areas. And little bluestem. Everybody knows little bluestem. It should be in everybody's yard, right? So looking at, and we've been talking with Neffy and Les over at TCI because they're really having a hard time keeping up with mowing on those medians. But can you imagine if we can get public acceptance and doing some prairie plantings in these areas, the pollinators, the biodiversity. I'm not going into all the co-benefits, it's too much. But even in our own yards, if we can, and all the major manufacturers, I called MTD and they were so excited to share that information about even their little, 21-inch or whatever lawnmowers will take you up to a height of 4 inches now. And then, of course, looking at the prairies, we would be probably looking at mowing those hopefully just twice a year at 5 inches because they're more sensitive to a low cut situation. And then when you can add, and again, saws, we've met with saws, they're totally on board, and especially using the green material in your yard and using that for mulch and compost, etc. Then the carbon sequestration and water storage capacity just soars. And then the barriers. Okay. So not everybody goes out in their tux and their cocktail dress to do their yard work, but it does give you kind of an idea. Don't you think that riding mowers has escalated in town? Even the riding mowers can be raised up to higher elevations. And so we're working, well, we'll talk. Public perception is a big issue. They want it, we call it the golf course look. And how do we build in acceptance? How do we show the benefits and have more folks come on board with changing their vegetation and soil practices. That'll be a big one to look at. And we're all worried about landscape maintenance folks, right? Bless their hearts. So we have the contractors that are a great mow and blow operation, but when you get down to trying to teach these different vegetative practices, they want to have a recipe, and that's what we'll be working towards, is creating specification and a recipe and some training for landscape maintenance crews to be able to implement these and understand why they're implementing them. And already Parks and Rec has done a great job. They're working with us at Milam-Teeler Park, where we're going to be adjusting, and all the things that you see here we're going to be implementing, including a pocket prairie, restoring some riparian landscape. And Parks has just been a great partner, and they're already going to have all of their mowing done at no less than 3 inches and try to pull as many areas out as possible to increase that height to 5 inches.
Wow, cool.
It is exciting, isn't it? So using this information and where we go from here. So we know that the parks are a huge major part of the city's green infrastructure. So increasing public education, using the 2020 UDC update process to increase parklands and support lit and green infrastructure, support parks and TCI to modify management practices and increase restoration efforts, incentivize effectively the use of lid and natural channel design for stormwater. See, we kind of have our own little green infrastructure map. And in conclusions, looking at increasing soil capacity to store water will lead us towards reducing peak flows that cause flooding, improving water quality in our streams and rivers, promoting water conservation, increasing aesthetics with healthier landscapes, and provide a slew of co-benefits. And then soil carbon, it may not be the big one. It won't get us to the 40% reduction in emissions or offset that, but it needs to be and should be an active part of the solution to create climate resilience. And just to add this, between Lisa going out and contacting, she's great. She just does cold calls all the time. Contacting NRCS and getting them interested in coming to San Antonio for a meeting. And over this, since October, it was October, that we met with them, and they have run it up the flagpole. San Antonio has been selected to be the pilot project to do soil carbon analysis. We'll be meeting with them next week. So they'll be doing baseline studies in parklands. They really want to get out to the aquifer protection lands and do some there. They want to do ball fields, etc. But they're not going to leave us just with some baseline data. It'll be our data. They'll give us recommendations, and they'll want to do follow-ups to see if we implement those recommendations, what's the increase that we're going to be seeing. So that's exciting, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Oh, next slide.